I'm so glad to have everybody here. And I thank you for your time because I know there's a lot of places that you can spend your time. And I appreciate that you chose to spend your time with me for this training of stop giving away your power. And I am Lori Rubenstein, and I am a guide, mentor, coach, author, speaker, and trainer. And I have a coaching business called Step Into Great, and I am an intuitive. I'm clairvoyant, sentient, and audient. Forgot the third one. So I get my information and work very intuitively. And one of the things I'm passionate about is helping women move through their subconscious patterns, energy constructs, and beliefs that are no longer serving them, and to heal and transform them so that they can go out and create a life that is theirs, that they want, and isn't the one that they feel like they were supposed to build. And I don't know if you can relate to that, but I absolutely can. And I did it. And my passion, that is my passion and my gift, because I see the patterns when they're ready to come up and we can work through them and heal. One of the keys to this is staying in our power and learning to really own it and catch it when leaks come up and our energy is leaking through. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm excited to have you guys here. We're going to start first is I'm going to talk about the 3 warning signs. And I will tell you, I created this training 2 weeks ago. And this is one of the things I'm most passionate about, is helping you stay in your power, because when we stay in our power, we can liberate ourselves to our freedom, sovereignty, and our wholeness. And when we are in that place, our light is in full bloom. We are in full expression. We speak our truth. And it's a really beautiful place to be. And it's a liberation. And so many of us right now as women are being called to something more. We feel it. We're being called to open up. We're being called to tap in to creating something else. And that can create guilt sometimes, because we've created good lives. We have good lives. And the conditioning here is, who am I to complain? I have all this. Look what's happening in other parts of the world. And we let that guilt come in. But that's part of where we leak our power. Does that make sense? And that's how it gets sneaky. And when I wrote this 2 weeks ago, this last night, I read through it and was like, oh, it's shifted a bit more. Because right now the frequencies are moving so fast and everything's speeding up a little bit. So I have my notes and I've added a bunch of stuff. So we're going to move through this, because as I kind of tapped into who's here and who's going to be watching it, these other parts came in, and I think they're really important. So I want to start with just talking about power and what I mean by owning your power and what type of power. Because there's a couple types of power. And for me, if I simplify it, there's 2 types. We have egoic power, which is when we're in our head. It's very I-oriented. You can see egoic power in our politics. You can see it with what's happening in the world, and it's gaining power for self. Yes? That is egoic power. That is power coming from the ego. What we're being asked to do right now, especially as women, is to drop into our hearts. Heart-centered power. I call this sacred power. And I am here and collecting women who are ready to step into being a sacred warrior of the heart and owning that power. And that power brings in the sacred feminine. You know, for so long, we've kind of lived where I know some of my beliefs where I can't hang on to that sacred feminine too much because that's weak. And that's not true. It took me a while to come in to bring that sacred feminine in and own that and the power. And when I was really able to do that and saw that, my mom she had in 2019, she was diagnosed with Lewy body's Parkinson's, which is very aggressive form of Parkinson's. And it acts a lot like Lou Gehrig's disease, where it kind of shuts down organs. And we had her in assisted living. I was flying out to San Antonio every other week to be with her and help my sister with her. And, you know, sometimes people are in that situation, they get really grunky. That's a Laurieism. Grumpy and cranky. I like that though. But they get kind of mean. And I watched my mom, and she was so kind and so nice and so gracious to the people that were helping her. And to the entire situation, she moved through it with such grace. And for a while, I just watched her and I thought, that is the hardest, most powerful thing you can be and do in that situation. And I had to apologize because I was tough. I was a tough kid growing up. One, I could see all your stuff. And for her, I was tough. And because she was such a loving, caring, sweet mother, I felt like she was weak. Because culturally, as women, and Deanne, you and I are just talking about this, culturally as women, we're kind of trained out of that. It's like we need to be the caregivers, we need to take care of everybody, we need to be, you know, graceful and, you know, yada yada yada. I didn't always get that memo growing up, but my mother was the epitome of that. And she's from the South. Her mom was from Asheville, North Carolina. And that's kind of what set up for me to lose that sacred feminine and to get out of the heart and be in my head and move more towards the masculine side of, let's get it done. Let's be productive. Let's, you know, make it happen. And it took seeing that, you know, I had understood we have to bring in the sacred female, the sacred feminine, and we need to balance that with the sacred male energy, right? But I had to come back to that and see. And my mom was such a beautiful teacher for me, especially at the end of her life, and the grace that she went through that with. And I will be forever thankful for her and that teaching she gave me at the end of her life. And I will forever be apologizing for being very difficult. And I believe it is women who are going to lead us in to this next phase of higher consciousness that we are moving into in our world. We are the answer. And I do believe men are coming up too, but we have to bring in the sacred feminine. And that's what we're being called to drop into our hearts, to own our sacred power. And we are warriors. Sacred, that sacred power brings us together. It's the one. It's the whole. It's the connection we all share. And owning our power is a journey. I have been on this journey for 34 years. I started at 24. I got my first 2 books. We were introduced to it. And I've been taking a deep dive in all these areas for 34 years. And I'm still moving through it. You know, you're never going to be perfect all the time and in it and own it and in your light. Because we're human. You know, we are human. But what it is your ability to catch it and move through it quickly and get back in your power. And that's what we're going to talk about. Good? Any questions? Okay, awesome. So some of the warning signs, I said 3, but there's a few more that got added. So we're going to talk about them. But the overall and probably the most subtle is when we give away our power, one, a lot of times it's subconscious. We don't know it because it's in a pattern or a belief or an energy construct that was formed between the ages of 1 and 10, and most of it by the age of 7. But what we do feel is we feel it in the body when we're doing it, because we can feel where it's coming from. And all subconscious patterns that are not serving us, subconscious patterns, energy constructs, and beliefs that are not serving us are attached to a pattern that in some way, I got that backwards. So all subconscious patterns that are not serving us are attached to an automatic mode of behavior. If that in some way is the piece where we're giving away our power. Does that make sense? So in these patterns are the energy constructs, are the beliefs that we formed at a very early age. We feel these patterns when they're triggered in the body. And it's pretty subtle. But if you can catch it in the body, you can catch it before it happens, because that's your warning sign, right? And that's the hardest. But if you can catch that, you can catch yourself and stop the leak. Stop the behavior that gives away the power. Does that make sense? Wisdom comes from the body. The brain is binary. It compares and analyzes. But our wisdom is getting back in our bodies, getting back in our hearts. You know, some of the most successful people out there, what's in a lot of, I love biographies, and when you read a lot of different people, one thing they usually will have in common is they'll say something about, it was a gut feeling, I just knew. And we all have that intuitive power. We all have that intuitive ability. It's just reconnecting to it. And reconnecting to all the support we have on this side and the other side. And our body's wisdom helps us do that. But it is the hardest and the most subtle. It's the simplest, but not the easiest. Does that make sense? Yeah. So resistance. Have you ever felt yourself getting resistance? And you may not have all of these warning signs. One may be predominant, but man, resistance is pretty predominant for me. When I get into a situation where I catch myself going into resistance, at this point, I'm always like, because I have to look at it. Because if I'm resisting something, there's a pattern. And mine sounds like, oh, I already know that. Yeah, I did that already. Tried that. It's like truth is coming at you and you're kind of batting it away. But you know the truth. You can feel the truth. And the most recent resistance I went into happened probably a month ago. And I was putting together and revising. I'm going to launch a year-long group the end of December, again this year, but I'm changing the name. And I was working with my mentor. I'm part of a mastermind group called The Source with Richard Tabinger and Kylie Slavic. And I was talking to Richard and I was talking about the group, and the title of the group is Own Your Magic. And he stopped me and he said, is it own your magic or own your power? And I immediately said, nope, it's own your magic. Resistance. And then he was good enough. He said it again. He said, is it own your magic or own your power? And I sat back for a second because I was really trying to catch it. And I said, nope, it's own your magic. And then I went into justification. Right? There's the leak. Out it goes. I gave away my power. If you're justifying, you're giving away your power. If you're explaining, you're giving away your power. And then I caught it after I caught it. And I came back and I got curious and I asked, why did you ask if it's power? And Richard said, didn't you have to own your power before you could own your magic? Yes, I did. And we talked about that. But the minute I went into the truth of that, and I knew that was the title, and I changed it. Before that, I was trying to write emails and copy for it, and I was struggling. The minute I changed that, claim back my power, it just came flooding in. And it's one thing that's through all of my work. And that's what happens when we can catch it. And I feel like, and I had a really good example this morning that I'll share later, but it's not that you're always in it and owning it. It's, can you catch it and how quickly can you move through it? So we've got the body, we've got resistance, which is my biggie. We have, when we go into justification or explanation, then we have reaction. When we overreact to something, we just react. And there may be anger in there. There may be emotion that comes up. But this is the one that is completely tied into the pattern. And when you see people overreact, a lot of times you can see the age at which that pattern was set by how they overreact. It's fascinating. Can you think of a time you've overreacted or reacted to something? And and you think, and a lot of times we can't catch it in the moment. A lot of times we catch it after. And whenever I catch it after, it's like, then you have to try not to go into judgment, right? Because that's the other one, judgment. When we go into judgment, there's a place we're giving away our power instead of just owning it and not judging it. So these are some of the ways, if you watch these things, reactive behavior and resistance are big ones. And the reactions is the emotion and the behavior that's attached to the pattern that comes up. So does anybody want to share some time you can recently or in the past where you felt you gave away your power and you were in one of these warning signs? Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, so I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was trying to get a hold of my husband and he wasn't answering. And I was sure he was on the phone with my son and I was coming in second, right?
Yeah.
And I totally overreacted because it's like, I want to be your most important thing, right? Well, in reality, he was still at work. He wasn't talking to my son at all. I'm like, oh, and then I just like laid into him when I finally got a hold of him, and he's like, I'm just driving home from work. I'm like, oh, I was so embarrassed. So I'm even red now.
Right? Yeah. But it happens so easily, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll share something very similar that happened this morning. But and that's the thing. And here's the other part is we catch it. You see it, right? I mean, you've done a lot of work, Debbie. And but then we judge ourselves because then you went into I'm embarrassed, right? Instead of, hey, I'm human,
Right.
right? And you caught it. And it's kind of when you can catch it and you can look back, have some fun with it. Because I've done that. Have you done that, Deanne? Yep. I think there's a lot of us that have done that. And then if you haven't, I think you're lying. Thank you for sharing that, Debbie.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Sorry, just swallowed. Okay, we're back. Hate when you swallow air with your water. All right, so any questions around the warning signs?
So how many warning signs did you give us? Because
Oh, I gave you, well, let's go through them. Sensations in your body, you'll feel it.
okay.
I tend to feel it in my solar plexus. Okay, I'm still choking. Judgment, when we go into judgment. Resistance. Reaction. when we, I think that was it. Yeah. Truth.
So
You know,
my outline got a little messy here, so.
messy. So did mine. It's like, okay, don't have time to completely redo this, but we'll just make notes. So
Thank you.
any questions around that?
I guess I had one question
Yeah.
just when you were talking about reaction. Is that like for me, the word that came up was like a trigger. Like,
Yeah.
would you say those are the same or is there a subtle difference?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Right. I think they can be the same. You know, when I say trigger, it's usually a pattern's been triggered. So what sets off the automatic mode of behavior for the pattern? Reaction is always part of that, because the automatic mode of behavior is the reaction that happens. There's a subtle difference because when we're, and that's such a great question, Deanne, because it's those tiny little distinctions that are in there. So when we get triggered and we go into our pattern, we're definitely giving our power away. And it's definitely the reaction. Sometimes we can just react, and it isn't always attached to a pattern. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like traffic. Or you go in a door and somebody goes in right before you, and then the door smacks at you, react. That doesn't necessarily mean a pattern's been triggered. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Right? That's just kind of rude.
Right. Yeah.
Does that help? Does
Yeah,
that?
it's interesting. Yeah, it does help. I'm just saying because the word trigger is at least in my circles, it's very commonly
Yeah.
used.
Yes.
And I have a teenage, well, not teenage, now she's 20 years old, but she'll use that term so frequently. Like, I was triggered by this, I was triggered by that. Don't do
Yeah.
this. It triggers
It
me.
triggers me. Yeah.
And I just think it's interesting, the whole explanation, I guess. And I guess also thinking of the reaction, um, the distinction maybe between it is like reactions sometimes can be very state dependent,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
it's not showing like a whole behavior pattern
Right.
necessarily.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if you're having the best day of your whole life and I don't know, you just won the lottery or your husband said, I'm going to take you away on the dream vacation, and somebody closes the door or is rude to you, you might like overlook it a little bit, or it wouldn't really affect you. Whereas if you're having like the worst day and somebody just like at work disrespected you, or you're running late, or you're just in a bad mood and somebody does that, then your reaction could be very different depending on your initial
Right.
state.
Yeah. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. And I don't think anything's just all one, there's distinctions. And I think it's important to kind of flesh those out. So I love that you brought that up, because it's not, our subconscious patterns always have an automatic mode of behavior attached to them. But sometimes we just react, which is giving away our power because we didn't respond to the situation. So thank you. That was awesome. Any other questions? Okay. So how do we deal with it when it happens? We catch it, then what do we do? And one of the first things we do is give ourselves grace. Don't go into judgment, because that's just more giving it away and taking it away from ourselves, right? But if we can come and bring in grace, And a lot of times I'll call in the energy of grace, because we need compassion for ourselves. And I have a good friend, her name is Jennifer Cardigainer, and she uses the term, and I love this term so much, ruthless compassion. And you wouldn't think those two go together, but they go together beautifully, because you want to be ruthless in your compassion for yourself, the grace that you give yourself. Because like I said in the beginning, we're never going to spend 100% of our time in our power, because we're human. I mean, I am not an enlightened being by any means. So I go in and out. So it's so important for us to catch it and give ourselves that compassion, grace. And the more we can give that to ourselves, the more we can put that out into the world and give it to other people. Make sense? Awesome. So grace is a really important thing. And, you know, one of the ways that I was very tinted, probably the biggest way I give away my power in the past, was to people I thought knew more than myself. You know, I think they know more than me. So I would give away my power to them, only to find out after I had paid a ton of money for a course, or D shake, think you're feeling me, D. Or, you know, you pay a lot of money, or you're sitting there in a training and thinking, I already know this. I was talking about this 20 years ago. Or somewhere down that line, and it's like, I did it again. I gave away my power to somebody I thought knew more than me, and I didn't honor and own the power of what I knew, what I have spent the last 20 some years deep diving into. So grace is really important to bring that in. And the last time I did this was probably, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago. And I was working with a coach. He invited me in to be part of an agency. And I was like, and that appealed to me, to work with other coaches, to be collaborative. I love the idea of that. And he was an amazing coach. But when it came to building a business, and when he brought the people together that he told me he was bringing together, it was not the people that he had told me he was bringing together. And then when we started going into it, you know, I just kept seeing why did I so underestimate myself and overestimate him by giving my power to him? But I had to do it apparently one more time before I fully got it. But it was that experience. It was like, never again. Never again will I do that. And it took probably 7 more years before I joined the mastermind I'm part of now, that I joined last year. Because every time I'd look at something that was interesting, it was like, yeah, no, I'm doing it again. So I didn't do it until I found this group I'm in now. Because we all need support around this. This is something that is really difficult to do alone and for yourself. It's really easy to see it in other people. Would you agree? Not so easy to see it with yourself. So grace is a really important part of stopping it, of how you stop it when you find yourself giving away your power, or afterwards because it's a lot of times we catch it afterwards, but then give yourself the grace and then judgment-free awareness. Don't judge it, because then you give away your power again. That's that sneaky piece. And just go into curiosity, look at it. Ruthless compassion helps you do that. Observe it. And then the third thing to do is to excavate it. Bring in that curiosity. Ask yourself, why did I just do that? Or what's coming up for you? What happened? And just notice. Because so much of this clearing and healing, and when we give away our power to claim it back, can happen super fast now. And this morning, I'll tell you this story. I had to drop my car off at the dealership. And I am putting on snow tires. And they offered me, I got a loaner, which was awesome. So I could be back here with you guys. And they drive up, and it's this teeny tiny little car. It's like, I don't think I've driven a car that small since I was in college and had an MGB, like little. And I got kind of entitled, like, and of course, there's a couple things going on. Because one, I didn't want to drive that little car because it was so small. But I found myself going, well, don't you have another loaner? Entitlement. Entitlement comes when I didn't set it. I didn't even ask beforehand. So I hit entitlement. And then he said, well, I think we have an electric car, but I don't know if it has enough juice. I caught the entitlement, was like, no, this is going to be fine. Oh, martyr. Right? Martyr, leaking more energy. And I started driving away, and I thought, there it goes. What? And I had to go into curiosity and bring grace in and be like, okay, wow, that wasn't a good way to start your morning. Or was it? Because I had this masterclass. And that's how quick it can happen. It's like, oh, that was entitled. I wasn't rude, but that was an entitled nature, right? I don't want to drive that small car. Martyr. Oh, no, it's okay. And then I got curious and was like, Lori, you have a car. They gave you a car to drive, so you're not stuck in the auto dealership. How about gratitude? Let's claim our power back and go into gratitude. And this all happened in like 5 minutes. That's where we want to be. It's not that we're always in our power, but we can catch it. And then we can move through it. You know, I could have beaten up on myself, gone into judgment. I can't believe you've done this. You've been doing this work forever. How could you have done that? That doesn't help anybody. But to catch it, compassion, judgment free, get curious, excavate it, and then move into where you want to be, which for me at the time was gratitude. Because I had to get back to Carbondale from another town where the dealership was. And they gave me a car. So I could do that. That's awesome. So can you see how quickly it can happen? And I've been doing this work for 34 years. But the boom, boom, boom was like, oh man. And just catch it and love on yourself. And that's how you claim your power back. Make sense? Okay, any questions? The end.
So I have a question as far as it just came to mind. For me is a lot of times when you're in relationship, particularly close
Yes.
relationships
Yes.
with people um, who are used to you, going into your patterns, maybe to giving up your power,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yep.
And then you become aware of that you're doing this and you make the conscious choice that you aren't going to do that, right? That a lot of times when you start to change, people around you, like the energy is change back, that you get hit with the change back. Like
Yeah.
they don't like this new version of you.
No.
And they have some, you can feel it. Maybe they express it to you. Like, how do you, I don't know, how do you kind of navigate that?
That's awesome. That's a big one, right? And I'm a fixer in my family. That was my role, is I came in and fixed it. Took it over, fixed it. And a few years ago, it was like, I am not going to accept that role anymore. I am not the fixer. And they don't like it. People don't like it because we've trained them for a long time, or at least I did for a long time, that I'm the fixer. There's a problem, come to me, got it, it's fixed. But it wasn't mine to fix. And in me being the fixer, I was enabling people, right? But when I stopped being the fixer, and it blew up one 4th of July, my whole family was there. And man, our families, they're good teachers, aren't they? And my dad and my brother don't get along real well. And my dad came in and he was mad at my brother, something that got said. And he was, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to leave. And the fixer would be, don't worry, make everything okay. Right. And I said, that's your choice. If that would make you support you better and you don't want to deal with it, then feel free to leave. He didn't talk to me for 2 days. They kind of upped the behavior for a little while. And right after he came in, my brother came in, same thing. And then my brother, I said, well, dad left, you can leave too. If that feels better to you, whatever you need to do for you. And then he got mad and walked back outside. He didn't leave, but but that's what happens is they come back at you. And it's for us to stay in our power and reclaim it. It's understanding that we're retraining them now. So they're just behaving like they've always behaved. We've changed. So as long as we're not continuing to step into it and allowing them the power to be mad or upset or to make their own choice, then they begin to retrain themselves around you. And what's funny about that, because my family's pretty retrained at this point, and we had a situation with my dad moved from Texas to where I live. And so he could be closer to more of his family. And the movers, we were gonna get a U-Haul, move them out here. And he just turned 80. And there's a really nice independent senior living that he could apartment that he could move into. And my sister found a moving company, a smaller moving company that could move him. for less than the U-Haul and me flying out there and us driving everything back here from Texas. And long story short, they were supposed to be here on September 2nd, and they got here 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So he was living with us, and he did well, but it was, you wonder if you're ever going to get your stuff. And my sister had been dealing with it, and she'd been talking to them and trying to get them out here. And I finally was like, this has to get done. And I went into my old pattern, gave my power away, called my sister and was like, just send me all this stuff. I'll call and get it taken care of. But I caught it. And I called her and I had to apologize. And I said, I'm so sorry. You have done a great job handling this. And her superpower is relationships. She's amazing. I'm kind of like a bull in a china shop sometimes, but she just can build the relationships so that things get done in a win-win situation. And I just said, you've done such a great job. That was totally wrong of me. Because you've got this. You can handle this. I'm not going to come in and ruin it. That was hard to speak my truth that way, because I also felt like she wanted me to handle it. But then she said, thank you. I was feeling bad, like I couldn't handle anything right. That was a big lesson for me. So we're going to retrain them, but we also have to trust them that they've got this, and not double down on control. That is part of that pattern when people get upset with us because we've trained, now we need to retrain people of how we're going to react. Does that make sense, Deanne? I know that was a long answer, but it was such a perfect question because this happens all the time. Whenever we start claiming our power back and we see our patterns and we're like, no more, I am no longer going to be the fixer. It's not mine. And these things happen. And I don't know. And, and there's lots of roles we move into: the caretaker, mine's the fixer. What are some patterns that you have that you've walked away from and retrained people? I know you have, Deanne, because you had the question.
Yeah. So I guess my big pattern giving away power was always being afraid of anger. Like I don't, other people's anger, like raising their voice or yelling or being angry at me, was a big thing. And anyway, so I put up with a lot of verbal and emotional abuse from my ex-husband for years. Anyway, over the phone. And a friend of mine eventually said, why don't you just hang up on him when he starts doing that? And I remember, I'm like, I'm because I'm not rude. I don't hang up on people. She's like, if he's yelling at you, just hang up. Tell him, say, if you start to yell at me or, be verbally abusive, I am going to hang up. And so I was like, okay, all right. So I started doing that. And he would call me back and he'd start yelling all over again. Hang up, call me back, and over and over. But after, I don't know how many months it took, but after a while, he stopped. And I was just like, oh my God, like it worked. Like just speaking my truth and saying, you don't yell at me, you don't, and even though I was fearful, I followed through, and it shifted the whole pattern, and it was better for me and for him, right? Because, it's not good for him to feel like to be powerful, you have to be loud and abusive.
Right. That's awesome. Thank you, Dan. That's awesome. Yeah. And it's just such a perfect example of when we go into that. And I call that the peacekeeper. It's like, make, everybody feel good, everybody keep the peace. And, there's so many of these that we've learned to be growing up that are these patterns. And women, you're so much more powerful than you know. So much more powerful than you know. And when you can just catch these and keep catching them and go through have grace with yourself and ruthless compassion, as Jennifer says, and excavate it, bring in curiosity. Curiosity is my favorite tool because when you go into curiosity, you can't be in self-judgment. And when you do this, you can start speaking your truth. Just like you talked about, Deanne. And when you are in your heart, in that sacred power, and you speak your truth, it is always best for everyone. It may be hard to hear sometimes, but it's always going to be best for everyone. So once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once expanded, you can't go back. Keep expanding, keep seeing it. Because you are more powerful than you know. And we are being called. Sacred warriors of the heart are being called forward to liberate themselves, to come into their power, full light. Our light is our power. The more power we allow ourselves to have, the more light we have to pass on and to impact. And when we do that, we can liberate ourselves to our wholeness, our freedom, and our sovereignty, which just multiplies. And my belief is women we are the ones that will turn the tide. So I want to really thank you so much